All right, we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Gerber, Marketing Director here at DWD. Thank you so much for your interest in our session today. Are you ready for the next crisis? For those of you that have questions that arise during the presentation, please submit them using the chat feature in Zoom. We will be allowing time at the end to address all those questions. Before I turn it over to Carrie, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that we are hosting monthly nonprofit webinars. Please watch for invitations to register to attend. And also, just so you know, you're welcome to forward the invitations to any of your board members or other nonprofit connections. At this time, I will turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Amanda. Today, we're going to talk about crisis, getting ready for the next crisis. So one of the most important steps to survive a crisis is to identify the events or circumstances that could cause a crisis. So first, what is a crisis? And a crisis is, they may vary from organization to organization, but we've kind of listed a few major ones that could affect all nonprofits. Damages to your facilities, such as a fire, natural disasters, floods, storms, hurricanes, maybe tornadoes, it depends on where your organization is located. Violence, sudden death or illness of an executive director or board chair that makes them not able to serve and do their responsibilities. Criminal activity or improper conduct. Financial crisis, such as fraud, loss of funding, bankruptcy, cyber attacks on your organization, or even a pandemic, which we're currently experiencing. So these are kind of some of the general issues that could affect your organization. So what do we need to do to prepare for these? For example, you received a phone call last night that your executive director was killed in a car accident. What would you do? Are you ready for that? Or you received a phone call that your board chair has COVID and is in the hospital on a ventilator. What would you do? There was a news announcement this morning that your CFO has been accused of embezzling your organization's fund. How are you going to handle that? There's going to be press, there's going to be publicity, people are going to be talking about it. How is it going to affect your organization? One of your employees that everyone knows works at your organization posted something on Facebook that wasn't so nice. What are you going to do? Are you ready? Or even your largest donor who provides 90% of your budget called to tell you that they are redirecting their funding and will only be able to provide half that amount that they normally do. What are you going to do? There are two sides to managing a crisis, the planning and the response. Organizations that anticipate the possibility of a crisis and properly prepare are going to be better equipped to manage such situations or possibly avoid them altogether. Part of crisis management is preparing for things that won't ever happen, that we hope will never happen. The focus on crisis and disaster planning ensures that the nonprofit is able to adequately prepare for emergencies, again, that we hope never happen, respond quickly and clearly, continue to offer essential programs, resume full operations as soon as possible, and also safeguard and protect our vital organizational resources. So who is responsible for planning and preparing for these crises? Everyone. We need to have everyone on board to succeed. That includes your board of directors, your executive committee, who are probably going to step up and have a few more meetings than normal, management, your staff. You need to seek wisdom and collective support to help you stabilize the organization during these circumstances. We need to make sure that we're continuously communicating with board members, keeping them up to date on what's going on. Normally, board members aren't actively involved in the everyday operations of an organization. However, when you have some kind of crisis going on, you want to make sure that they are kept up to date on what's going on and ask for their input. During this time, it's not about one individual. It's not about just the executive director trying to make it through the storm. It's about the whole organization. We need to take joint responsibilities. You may have to shift some priorities around. You might have a long list of things that need to be done. However, during this time, we're probably going to have to reduce that list and just focus on the immediate priorities. We're also going to have to adapt quickly in order to get through this. The leadership that you have in place will make a difference to help you get through this. So are you ready? Here are a few things to think about in preparing for the next crisis. And you know there's going to be another crisis coming. It could be another pandemic. It could be a natural disaster, but something will happen again. So some things to think about and that we'll go over today. Do you have a public relations plan in place? How about a disaster recovery plan? I know a lot of our clients, when we go out and do audits, we ask if there's a disaster recovery plan in place. Do you have a succession plan for both your board chair and executive director? Do you have a technology plan in place to fight against the cyber attacks? Do you have proper insurance in place? Do you have a plan for major loss of funding? And are you monitoring your reputation, what other people are saying and thinking about you? So first, through this whole crisis planning, being communicative during a crisis is essential for maintaining relationships with your various constituents, volunteers, donors, board members, funders. So we want to make sure that we have a communications plan in place. So it is also imperative that those within your organization know how to communicate effectively, both internally and externally. So in order to do this, we first want to define our key stakeholders and our priority audience. So if something happens to our organization, who do we want to make sure knows what's going on? Well, obviously our staff. We need to make sure that they are aware what they need to do, what their responsibilities are. Board members, we need to make sure that they know what's going on within the organization because they're ultimately responsible for our organization. Volunteers, funders, maybe some other major vendors, anyone that you feel needs to know what's going on with your organization during this time. So once you identify those key stakeholders, we want to organize the contact information for them. So how are we going to get a hold of them? Phone numbers, emails. Make sure that we keep these lists up to date because those key stakeholders are going to change. And again, we want to put this plan in place before a crisis happens. So that way, when the crisis happens, we can just grab the list and we know who to call. So it's important to make sure that the list is kept up to date. So then we need to determine how we're going to communicate with these individuals. Again, emails, calls, social media. Are we going to be posting updates on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Maybe you have a group, private group Facebook for employees. How are we going to get this information out to them? And who is going to contact these key stakeholders? So for employees, maybe the HR director's responsibility will be to contact all of the employees. Perhaps the director of development or your fundraising person will be responsible for contacting various foundations and donors. So we need to document not only who we're going to contact, how we're going to contact them, and who is going to be doing the contacting. Then we also need to develop a message, and we need to make sure that the message is clear and consistent. So we want to communicate what measures have we taken as an organization during this crisis. Will we be shutting down or maybe just limiting our services? I know during the pandemic, a lot of organizations were either forced to close or limit services, limit the number of people on site. So we need to communicate what our plan is to address that. What will your hours of operation be? How can the organization be contacted? So in some instances, you may have a crisis where you are not able to get to your organization's office, or maybe your phone lines went down or your email went down. So how are we going to allow people to contact us to keep in communication with us during this time? We always want to remember to provide accurate, frequent, and timely updates and always tell the truth. So it may be, there's all kinds of things going on during a crisis. We don't want to sugarcoat things. We don't want to not tell the whole story. We want to look at our message and develop a message that that is telling the community and our stakeholders what's going on. We don't want to, provide any extra drama or anything that we already have enough of that. So just being calm, again, providing frequent, timely updates of what's going on with your organization. As I said, your organization's office may not be accessible during this time, so we want to make sure that we have a plan to forward voicemails, phone calls to someone. Also making sure your employees can access email remotely. So if they have, clients or need to get in contact with each other, how are they going to be doing that? Also, you want to make sure that you are able to update your website with important information remotely. So making sure that that can be accessed remotely offsite. Similar to a communications plan, we want to also develop a public relations plan. So this is more directly dealing with the media. So we want to, first of all, designate a spokesperson, one person that is the person that's going to go talk to the media and provide updates on behalf of our organization. Ensure that all the other employees and volunteers know who this spokesperson is, and make sure that they know that that spokesperson is the only person that is supposed to talk on behalf of the organization. So no board members, no volunteers, no one else, just that spokesperson. In order for the spokesperson to deliver the message properly, we probably want to give them some training in dealing with the media, again, prior to this crisis happening, so that way we are prepared when it happens. Again, ensure that there is a consistent message and keep the media informed of the developments that are going on. So here is a sample public relations policy, very simple. So when contacted by the press or an outside news organizations for comment, all inquiries are to be directed to, and then you put in that person's name, whether it be your board chair or your executive director, whoever that designated spokesperson is for your organization. No one else is to comment on behalf of the organization. That way we get one consistent message from that person. All right, so what if something happens? You have some kind of crisis happen. What does your insurance cover? Many nonprofits make the mistake of assuming that all the losses will be covered by insurance, which isn't always the case. So I'd recommend that you discuss with your insurance how and when your insurance coverage will respond to different types of events. Make certain that you also discuss any kind of extra costs or business interruption expenses that may be needed during this time. Also review your current limits in place and deductibles for the coverage to determine any changes that are necessary. And this is probably something that should be done every year regardless. But then also keep in mind when you are reviewing this, should something happen, what's the worst case situation that could happen? Do you have enough insurance in place to cover that? You also want to prepare a summary of insurance policies that includes all your coverages, who the carrier is, and then the reporting requirements of all the policies. So that way you can promptly report the claims in the case of an emergency. And obviously you want to store this off-site somewhere or in the cloud, so that way you have access to it in case you cannot access your organization's office. So here are some common insurance coverages to consider for a nonprofit organization. Auto insurance to cover any vehicles. Obviously, if you don't own vehicles, that wouldn't apply. Crime, cyber, directors and officers insurance. D&O insurance is not a requirement for all nonprofits, but it is very strongly recommended that all nonprofits do obtain D&O insurance. Employee insurance, if you have employees, general liability, property and workers' comp. So obviously there are other insurance policies out there and available, but these are the main ones that many nonprofits have that you should probably consider that your organization implement. So if something does happen and your office is destroyed, you need to know what you had in order to replace it by insurance. So we need to conduct an inventory of all of our assets. So what are our assets? What do we need to be tracking here? Equipment, furniture, records, databases, anything else needed to fulfill your mission. What equipment is vital to delivering your services? So what do you need to have to provide services to your clients, to your program participants? Obviously, you might have a coffee pot. Well, okay, that's nice, but that's really not a necessity to be providing your services. So if these items were damaged, destroyed, and inaccessible, what are you going to do to continue being able to provide your services? Are you going to borrow these items? Are you going to try and replace them right away? Are you going and restore the equipment? How will you be able to continue offering your programs if you don't have these items? In addition to just, a description of what kind of equipment your organization has, you should also include brand names, model numbers, location, purchase price, the date of the purchase, and other key details that you have, so that way you can submit them for insurance claims and replacements. Again, you should store a copy of the inventory off-site or in the cloud, so that way it's easily accessible should something happen to the organization's office. Along with physical equipment, what documents and records does your organization maintain and where are they located? So this really has to do with your document retention policy, which begs the question, do you have one in place? Do you have a written document retention policy in place that says, here's all of your important documents, your financials, your bylaws, your board minutes, that type of thing. Where are they being kept and how long will you keep them? Are copies of crucial items stored off-site? So again, as far as the written documentation plan, you don't need to keep all of your documents in paper form. You can if you want, but you can also keep them electronically, an electronic copy in Dropbox or in the cloud somewhere, obviously somewhere secure with limited access, but you are certainly welcome to keep those in an electronic format as well, which helps should something happen to your organization's office and everything is completely destroyed, then that way you will already have a copy of all of your important documents electronically offsite. Along with documents and records software, we've used a lot of software in nonprofits, your accounting software, your donor management software, maybe some other client software tracking, counseling hours or what other kinds of program related items. Do you have a record of all of these softwares that you use, the license numbers, in case your systems are completely damaged and beyond repair and you need to replace these? So not just the physical assets of equipment, but also your documents and your technology that you use, which is very important in the operation of your organization. All right, so what if your organization has a cyber attack? So cyber threats are constantly changing. Technology evolves every day. First of all, we need to determine what devices in your organization are connected to the internet. So look, where are the threats? So obviously computers, both desktop and laptops. And these would be computers both in your office, but also at your employees' homes. So you may have employees that work from home or off-site. Additionally, during the pandemic, I know a lot of organizations went to remote workforce. So employees probably are taking their laptops home. They're probably connected to your organization's internet now, or the intranet. So what is connected? Also iPads, cell phones. If someone loses a cell phone, can it be wiped by the organization so you don't have to worry about any kind of access to the organization's information? What data can be accessed by these laptops, phones, iPads? Nonprofits have access to a lot of confidential information, whether it be credit cards from donors, social security numbers, names and addresses, health records. There's the financial, there's the client information, the donor information. So if someone were to hack into someone's laptop and get access to your system, what are they going to be able to access? So we really need to put someone in charge of managing the IT. So who manages IT technology at your organization? Is it part of your executive director's responsibility? It might be. Maybe it's part of your CFO's responsibility. Or maybe you have a designated IT person, or maybe you have a contracted IT firm that handles your technology. You need to make sure that someone within your organization is responsible for maintaining the organization's technology and internet, and then document that. So here are a few recommendations in order to prevent cyber attacks. First of all, create an awareness of possible threats. So again, what could happen? Educate your employees. I know several organizations that will send bogus test emails to employees to see if they will click on different links. Utilize multi-factor authentication to access applications. So, you put your username and password in, and then also, it sends a message to your phone that you have to click on in order to access it. Make sure you're backing up your databases and keep a copy either offsite or in the cloud, because that's a lot of information that if you were to lose it would just not be good. And then again, as we said before, determine what your insurance covers. Not all cyber insurance policies are the same. So talk to your insurance person about what your policy covers. If there is a breach, how does your policy respond? And again, what is the worst case scenario that could happen within your organization? Does your plan cover it? And then finally, implement a technology policy. So what's included in a technology policy or plan? First of all, it should be written, and it should be communicated to all of your constituents, your volunteers that are using it, staff, everyone should be aware of it. Include acceptable use of the organization's technology. So what does this mean? So if I have a laptop that I'm using that is the organization's laptop, can I take it home to use it? Can I do personal work on it? What kind of websites can I access on it? Is it only to be used to access work-related websites or work-related applications? Can I update my LinkedIn from it? What other restrictions are there in place? Password requirements. What kind of passwords are required? Obviously, everyone should have a unique password that they don't share with other people. But what about the use of letters, numbers, symbols, the length of the password, how often they should be changed? Should have something in place that addresses the use of passwords. And please don't put it on a yellow sticky on your desk or underneath of your keyboard. You want to make sure that no one has access to those passwords. Implement virus protection. Do you need to have a VPN, a virtual private network connection? Is that required in order to access the organization's application? And then again, can the organization's information be accessed from a personal device? So if I have my own personal laptop at home, can I get on and access my work email and any other applications from work? Or do I have to, or am I only allowed to access it from a organization's laptop or from an organization or at the organization? I know one nonprofit that makes electronic payments monthly from their bank, but the electronic payments can only be made from the CFO's computer in their office at the organization. So that's a good control to put in place to make sure that no one else is making electronic payments from the organization's bank account. So what type of those restrictions are in place? So again, during the pandemic, many organizations utilize a remote workforce. So how many of you were actually prepared for their staff to work remotely? So that's probably something that should also be included in your technology plan. And did the staff have proper technology to work remotely? Did they have laptops? Did you have to go out and buy a whole bunch of laptops or iPads for them to use? I know several funders were granting contributions for technology so that nonprofits were able to provide their staff the necessary tools. Did your staff have proper internet connections? Did you have to get hotspots for them? What was the security for remote work? Again, what can be accessed, that type of thing. So you can look back on it now, since we've kind of been through part of that and be forced to work remotely. Were you ready, and what can be changed moving forward? Okay, here's another thing that could happen. What if there are allegations, whether they're true or not, that end up on the internet and the newspaper about your organization? A nonprofit's greatest asset is its reputation. So, we talked about, what if you wake up and you see that somebody posted something bad about your organization, or one of your employees posted something that probably they shouldn't posted. Well, how does that reflect back on your organization? So this has to do with reputational risk, and that's the loss due to damages to an organization's reputation. It includes not only what is true, but what is perceived about your organization. So in addition to lost revenue, a bad reputation can lead to the loss of volunteers, the loss of clients or program constituents, difficulty in hiring qualified employees, difficulty in attracting board members, difficulty in obtaining grants or loans, increased scrutiny by regulations, and just an overall decrease in community support. So again, it's really hard to come back from a bad reputation. So we want to make sure that we put processes in place to prevent that from happening. So one way to do that is to monitor your organization's reputation. So you really need to understand how your organization is perceived by the community, by volunteers, by board members, by your funders. And there are some ways that you can do this. Ask for feedback. Send out surveys, or set up meetings with your board members, employees to find out how they feel about your organization. What are they hearing other people say? And as far as feedback, if you do receive feedback that maybe isn't so good, or maybe recommendations, you should really address those. Okay, we hear this is what people are saying about us, or this is what John Smith thinks about us. What are we going to do about that? Google your organization. You might be surprised what you find out there. And this is what the public is seeing about your organization. So if they were to go out and Google your organization, they're going to see the exact same thing. You can sign up for Google alerts that alert you every time your organization is mentioned on the internet. So that way you can see what other people are posting out there about you. Review your website. Is what is on your website how you want your organization to be portrayed? Is it updated? Is it out of date? Does it have your board lists from 2018 still on it? Make sure that you're updating it timely, and that you're sharing your organization's story out there, all of the good things that your organization does. Make sure that's out there for people to see. Aside from your own website, you also want to monitor third-party websites such as GuideStar, the National Center for Charitable Statistics, and the Better Business Bureau. So how is your organization portrayed on these websites? And you can actually set up accounts with each of these organizations and then log in and post information about your organization on there. Many of these organizations will provide some kind of a review, whether it be a gold, silver, or how many stars. So that's on there. But a lot of times they also provide opportunities for someone from the organization themselves to update what is on their website about the organization. So make sure that you check out those to see what is about your organization listed on their websites. And finally, develop a social media strategy. So, social media is it's everywhere nowadays, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever else the new one is out there. But Make sure you have a policy in place that outlines what your organization allows to be posted on the internet and who is responsible for posting it. Also include who's responsible for responding to comments on your organization. So a lot of times people's social media accounts will be open to comments, and anyone that is allowed to go out there and post comments. So make sure that you're watching that. So if someone does post something about your organization, that you can monitor that and to respond to it, especially if it is a negative comment. So next, succession plan. So what if your executive director or board chair suddenly becomes ill or even passes away? Now, obviously, we hope that this never ever happens and that we don't have to deal with this, but it could happen. Or let's take a positive spin on that. Let's say the executive director wins the lottery and decides not to come back. You still have to fill that position. So the executive director and board chair are key leadership positions within your organization. So you really want to make sure that you have the proper people in these positions. Your organization needs to have a written emergency succession plan for both of these individuals should something happen. And again, we want to make sure that we have these in place now. And this is just in general, we need to have a succession plan in place. The crisis could be where they get sick or they get hurt, but just in general, someone decides to leave, we need to have a replacement plan in place. A succession plan shows that your organization is prepared to continue operations despite any unexpected transition. It's also going to protect the organization's capacity to continue to perform key functions, sustain important relationships because you don't want to lose those if someone leaves, and fulfill its commitments during a leadership disruption or transition. So we really want this to be a smooth transition. There are 3 types of succession planning strategy. The first, departure defined strategy, exists when the executive director has decided that they will leave in 2 or 5 years. So they decide, okay, maybe I'm going to retire. I'm getting ready. Let's say 3 years from now, I'm going to step away. So that's fine. That's perfect. That gives organizations lots of time to plan for their departure. The second type of succession planning strategy is when the strategic leader development focuses on identifying the next in line before the executive director has left. So again, the executive director says they're going to leave, maybe not the 2 to 5 years out, but they haven't left yet. So we still have time to identify someone else before that person leaves. And maybe that new person can work with the executive director before they leave. Then we have emergency succession planning, and that focuses on having a backup plan in place should an unforeseen circumstance occur. And that is what we are talking about now. So in order to have a succession plan in place, we first need to know what we're looking for. What is this person going to be doing? So we need to define the executive director's responsibility in writing. So hopefully you already have a written job description for your executive director. But if you don't, let's put one in writing. Your executive director more than likely does a lot of things. They're going to have organizational responsibilities, community and professional engagement, administrative oversight, human resources. They're going to be involved in the financial management. There's probably other things that they do that people just take for granted that gets done. We want to make sure that we have this in writing. So if that person were to leave suddenly, we can make sure that all of their responsibilities and duties continue to be done. We also want to determine if the leave is going to be short-term, which is normally less than 45 days, long-term or permanent. So obviously, if someone passes away, that's a permanent. But maybe someone is just sick and you think that they're going to come back, but it's just going to be a while. So we need to think about how long is this person going to be gone, or are they going to be gone forever? Who will take over these roles in the interim? Is there going to be an acting executive director? Is there someone within your organization that may be able to fulfill these responsibilities? Maybe you have an assistant executive director or a COO maybe that would be able to step up and fulfill some of these roles. So is there someone currently within the organization that could fulfill some of these duties in the interim. Who is going to appoint this interim person? Is it the board of directors? Is it the executive committee? Need to know who has responsibility and authority to do that. What type of authority is this individual going to have? So if there is going to be an interim or an acting executive director, do they have the same authority as someone who is in that role permanently full time? For example, is an interim executive director going to be able to, sign loan documents or hire individuals? So what authority do they have? How much are they going to be paid? What will their compensation be? How will the change be communicated to staff, clients, donors? So your executive director is ill or passed away. So we have this new person in here. How are we going to communicate who this new person is? If they're permanent or if they're interim, we need to have a plan in place to be able to let all of those people know that need to know. Will there be a search committee for a new permanent ED? So maybe we say, okay, we're going to put this person as our ED in the interim, but in the meantime, we are going to have a search committee for a permanent executive director. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. So who's going to be on the committee? What is the interview process? How will the crisis affect the interview process? For example, nonprofit organizations that had to find a new executive director during the pandemic probably didn't conduct interviews like they did previously. Were there many Zoom meetings? Was it in person? How is what you're going through during the crisis going to affect the interview process? And then also we need to plan for any extra costs that will be involved. So as far as, hiring maybe a recruiting agency or extra expenses to maybe assist a new executive director to move, relocate, what extra costs are going to be involved? That's something to think about as well. We also should have a succession plan in place for the board chair, which is another key leadership role within the organization that we want to make sure is not left vacant. Again, we want to clearly define in writing the roles and responsibilities and expectations of the board chair. So really, we should already have this in writing because hopefully you already have a board member responsibilities, including the specific officers, what they should be doing in writing. So if something suddenly happens to the board chair and they can no longer serve, does your vice chair automatically become the chair? Or is the board required to vote on a new board chair? So you might want to check your bylaws on that. So some organizations, they might just have in place that, okay, if something happens to the board chair, can no longer serve, vice chair automatically steps up. A lot of times the officers, it may be, okay, secretary becomes treasurer, then treasurer becomes vice chair becomes chair. It could work that way. Doesn't have to work that way, and it might not work that way. Other organizations, though, may be like, okay, when the chair can no longer perform their duties, we're going to have to take another vote, and we are going to have to vote who is going to be the next chair. So make sure you have something in writing now on how you're going to address that. So that way, when it happens, you're prepared and don't have to struggle to figure out what you're going to do. And just in general, you want to make sure that you're recruiting the right and best people to your board to begin with. And provide the proper onboarding and board training so that it really is easier for succession planning, so the next person can step up and that you have a next person that knows about the organization, understands the organization, is a good leader, that type of thing. And also just maintain an active board that includes succession planning in its strategic planning, not only for board officers, but also the executive director. What if your organization is notified that a major donor is no longer going to support your organization? Or with the pandemic, many programs were shut down, which causes significantly significant loss of revenue. So what are you going to do? So all of a sudden, your organization is notified that they're going to lose some funding. How are you going to handle that? Well, first of all, let's assess the situation. How bad is it really? What revenue streams are going to be impacted? Is it a contribution? Is it maybe even funding from the government? Is it revenue from a program service that we offer? What is specifically being impacted? And then let's compare the numbers to prior year. So how bad are they and how low can they really go? What does the future cash flow look like? So, all right, so we know we've lost this funding source here. How much cash do we have right now? How much can we continue on before this is we really need to do something about it? What is the cause? Maybe it's just a one-time fluke, like, okay, this year we're going to change up our funding because of something, but we're going to continue to give to you the year after next. So just a one-time issue. Or is it, okay, we are totally revamping who we are supporting and your organization is not on that list anymore. So we need to figure out if this is a permanent loss or if it's just a one-time cause. What services are at risk? Are we going to have to stop offering some of our programs because we lost this funding? Are we going to have to start laying off staff because of loss of this funding? Lots of questions. So what can we do? Well, first of all, in order to help prevent this type of crisis, we really want to always monitor our revenue concentrations. So where are we getting our revenue from? Revenue should be from various sources. So not getting all of your revenue maybe from one foundation or from one grantor, but spreading it out, getting contributions from individuals, businesses, foundations. Maybe you have some program service revenue thrown in there. So really not relying on one significant funder. Run cash flow projections. So as of today, if you received no more cash, how long could you operate with the cash that you have on hand right now? So best practices say 3 to 6 months. So that might be something that you start looking at if you haven't already. Develop budgets for various scenarios. All right, so let's look at different what if scenarios. So we've lost this funding, okay, what if we lose 10%, 20%, or 30% decrease in revenue? At each of these levels, what costs are we going to have to decrease, or what activities are we going to have to eliminate or change up in order to us to continue operating as an organization? And then also determine additional funding options. So maybe you have some board designated funds that are set aside for maybe a future capital improvement project or an emergency. Well, this would be the time to use it. So can your board undesignate some of those funds so that you can use this during this crisis? Reach out to donors that have given restricted monies to see if maybe they can unrestrict some of their gifts. So maybe they gave money for program X, but program X really is okay. We have enough money to continue program X, but really we need some support for program Y. So reach out to them and ask them if they would consider moving their gift from program X to program Y, because your organization really needs that support there right now. Can you draw on your line of credit, or maybe obtain a line of credit if you don't have one, or any other type of loan from the bank? What other opportunities are available for support? So for example, during the pandemic, the government provided specific programs for nonprofits to get through COVID. Also, I know a lot of funders, the United Way, the Community Foundation, other funders provided specific grants and contributions to help nonprofits get through the crisis. So what other unique opportunities are there? Also think outside the box. What other type of revenue generators can you do during this time that maybe you haven't thought about before? So disasters can take many forms. As we said, from a hurricane, a flood, a pandemic, or even just like a power outage or a computer system crash. and they can strike at any time, which makes having a disaster recovery plan so important. So really what we've talked about is really all part of a disaster recovery plan. And the disaster recovery plan is really the process of making sure that you can resume your organization's activities after this disruptive event, after this crisis. So we want to make sure that we have a plan in place to respond to these events that enable staff to act quickly and appropriately during this time of disruption. Because when this crisis happens, we're not going to be able really to have time to think. We need to respond and we need to have the plan in place prior to the crisis. The first step is to determine what items in the organization are most important to protect, what we talked about. What do we need to continue our organization's operations? What applications are necessary? And we talked about the documents, the technology, the equipment, but really people are the most important. So protecting your people should be of foremost importance. Without your employees and volunteers, your organization's mission cannot be carried out. So after you focus on them, then that's when we're going to look at the other important assets that we talked about. The equipment, the computers, the financial data, the databases, the contracts, all those other types of things. So first, determining what is most important. Then we need to document. As with anything, written documentation. The current systems in place should be documented. So what are our procedures for the accounting system and software? How are data files backed up? The schedule for data file backups, where the backup disks and tapes are stored. So how are we going to, we need to know what we're doing so that way if something happens, we can make sure that we continue to do it. And then also a listing for alternative resources. So for example, if we talked about having the equipment destroyed or our office destroyed, how are we going to be able to get some kind of temporary equipment or temporary office space in order to continue our programs? And then also, again, maintaining key contacts, employees, volunteers, board members, insurance company, key vendors, key agencies. Making sure that we have all that documented so we know who to contact during the time of crisis. And then finally, we need to make sure that, we put all this plan in place so that way we're prepared when something happens. But we need to make sure that we review it and update it on a regular basis so that any necessary changes are made. Because over time, you're going to have changes in personnel. We said maybe the HR director is in charge of communicating to the employees. Well, maybe you don't have an HR director anymore. So who instead is going to be in charge of communicating to employees? So we need to make sure that those types of changes are reflected in our plan. And then also update it for any changes that you may note after you go through a crisis. So for example, we've all gone through this pandemic. So I bet if you had a disaster recovery plan in place before the pandemic, you could probably go back and look at it and probably make some tweaks of things that you learned going through this pandemic. Again, most disasters can't be anticipated. However, preventative measures can be taken to guard against the effects of an unexpected disaster. And I just threw this in here, this last slide here. We're going to learn so much. So I was talking to an executive director the other day, and they were talking about all of the different things that they had to change and how the pandemic is affecting all the different things that they do. And she decided that her response now to everything is we are going to learn so much from this. So moving forward, we're looking at this as learning opportunity to improve our organization and just more of a positive spin on it as opposed to the negative that we're so used to thinking about. So those are that's all the information that I had. So I think we have a few questions. So we'll just kind of look over a few of these in the last few minutes that we have. Someone asked, are we supposed to create a message for every possible crisis? That seems hard to do. There are so many possible different crises, which is true. I think no. I mean, obviously you're not going to have a message for if this happens or this happens or this happens. I think you want to create more of a general message that, hey, we're aware of what's going on. this is what we're doing to move forward. We're okay. We want you to just know what's going on. So more of a general message as opposed to each individual circumstance that happens. Someone also asked, in a small organization, should we have a succession plan for all positions, at least a note of who will take over in their duties? Right, definitely a succession plan for those key leadership roles, the executive director, board chair, but even other employees within the organization, you want to be able to cross-train responsibilities and duties. So if that person is gone for a while, that someone else can take over their duties. So maybe not necessarily a succession plan at the same level as an executive director or the board chair, but you do want to have some type of policy or procedure in place for it. If that person were to leave for an extended period of time, that someone else would be able to take over their duties. Let's see, what else? Someone mentioned that the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance has a sustainability calculator that might be helpful to nonprofits. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, I think those are most of the questions. Yes, we will email out the slides to everyone after the seminar. I think that's most of the questions. So again, thank you for attending today and for taking time out of your day to spend some time on your nonprofit. Again, we will be emailing these slides out to everyone. And we will have